Hey everyone, welcome. Nothing's permanent here. Post Thanksgiving, still lethargic from the tryptophan or whatever's in the turkey, but up and alert. Finally, getting a chance to get back to some amazing conversations today. We're snatching some time from Josh Chesler with the Tattoo Heritage Project, and that's just the beginning. He's got a whole origin story. But Josh, thank you for taking some time and chatting with us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yeah, yeah. So, just alluded to how we're connected through the Tattoo Heritage Project, but we always want to let you share your background, and you got kind of a cool sports history. Also, really into the arts, and doing a lot for a lot for artists in general. So, love to get your origin story. Where you're from and how'd you get to where you are today.
So I was born in New York. I kind of went to school and stuff in Arizona, and from there became, I don't want to say entrenched, but a little bit knowledgeable about the Arizona tattoo scene. I
Hmm.
made a lot of friends out there, started getting tattooed at 18 years old, just kind of, was interested in meeting people, interested in talking to people, and then went to college. And while I was in college, I was also playing baseball, both professionally, well, first in college and then professionally. So when I finally got my degree, I got it in journalism just because it was kind of the closest thing for me, and pretty much immediately started realizing that no one was doing interviews with tattooers. That was one of my kind of selling points for myself, was that if I could do this that not a lot of other people seemed to be doing at the time, that I wanted to tell these stories that weren't being told, because every tattooer that I knew had an interesting background. No one wakes up one day and says, hey, you know what, I think I'm going to tattoo. And so I wanted to tell these people's stories. I wanted to tell my friends' stories and bring them kind of more into the mainstream. And so I started doing that in Arizona. I moved to California about a decade ago and just kind of kept up with that. And I've had different day jobs and kind of different, paths along the way. But it's something that I've kind of kept doing throughout time, and have written for everyone from NBC to Playboy to LA Times, and everything in between about tattoos. And I guess accidentally became a tattoo historian in some ways. And so that all kind of, I don't want to say peaked, but the first major thing that I did was back in 2017. I helped curate the tattoo exhibit at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. And that was kind of a big deal. And we had a lot of people come through, and I've helped out with some other exhibitions and shows too. But that was kind of the big one that I guess put me on the map for a lot of that stuff. And that was how the Tattoo Heritage Project started.
I want to double back to some history stuff because I think there's some real interesting stuff there. But you mentioned starting the Tattoo Heritage Project. I know you were one of the originals that kind of approached Charlie about spearheading this.
Yeah, so during that tattoo exhibition at the Natural History Museum, the project manager basically for the exhibition was a woman named Christina Lockaby. And she had one tattoo that she got when she was like 18 or 19 years old, like a tiny, the smallest thing she could find when her friend dragged her into the shop, and never thought she was going to be a fan of it, never thought she was going to be super involved. And the second she started meeting these tattooers and hearing their stories and befriending them, she just fell in love with it. And so when that exhibition ended, because it was just a temporary exhibition, she and I had talked about how do we not necessarily keep this going, but kind of keep maintaining that part of the tradition and that part of the culture and the art form. Because, at a museum, everything's kept in like archival storage where, it'll hold up for thousands of years. Whereas here
Yeah.
were all these artifacts and all these paintings and everything that we were literally just handing back to someone to put in their garage. And so it
Mm-hmm.
it really didn't sit well with her that a lot of this stuff was going to be lost. And fast forward a couple of years, it was the beginning of 2020. So it was like, I think January or February 2020 was when we went up to Good Time Charlie's, but he was closing his tattoo shop up in Modesto, and he was selling off all of the artwork and kind of all the pieces out of it. And we kind of said, hey, we should go up and talk to him, A, see the shop before it closes, but B, let's see if either instead of or in addition to selling these things off, if he'd be interested in kind of starting almost an archival project. At the time, it wasn't
Mhm.
really a full-blown museum, but it
Mhm.
was just some kind of storage archival project to make sure that these pieces of history that, again, he was selling off for not a ton of money would be able to be cataloged somewhere and kept somewhere, so that way future generations could see what it looked like, and what that experience was like. So yeah,
Mhm.
like I said, I think it was February 2020. Christina, myself, and one other person who had worked on the exhibition drove up to Modesto, met with Charlie, talked to him for a while, and then we took him out, I think, for Chinese food, and over dinner basically proposed to him, hey, what if we did this? And
Mhm.
he was on board. Him and Kimiko both were almost
Mhm.
immediately on board, and we ended up getting tattooed by him that night as well. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, it was just kind of one of those fortuitous things where I think he had been kind of thinking about, oh no, what am I going to do with this? Because, obviously he was getting older and just wasn't sure that his kids were going to want everything, or that, who
Mhm.
was he going to pass stuff on to? So that's why he was kind of selling everything off
Mhm.
and having this idea of a museum where not only his stuff could go, but everyone else's stuff could go also was really appealing.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, I love it, and it's amazing. It's you mentioned your friend who had never gotten a tattoo, got a tiny little one, and then started to learn about tattoo artists and how unique most of our backgrounds are, and how we come into this very well. Like none of us come to like a school. None of us
Right.
come from sort of standardized mode. It's all like unique journeys that get us into tattooing. And I love that it's always because like Forrest is an avid collector. You're a collector as well, and a lover of the arts. Like it's you that lift up tattoo artists and like, no, your stuff is worth it. Like you're worthy of telling your story. Because many tattooers struggle with like imposter syndrome, like like, oh, you don't want this stuff. It's like, yeah, we do, and you're right. We don't want it to just rot in a shed somewhere, and then no one will know how one day in the future when robots are doing tattoos when humans used to do them. So,
No,
but
exactly. And that's one thing from my perspective also is that, like Forrest, I have some background in marketing, and I work with and I deal with a lot of tattooers where I'm not necessarily trying to give marketing advice. I'm not trying to, help people in that regard, but they know so little about what's going on that I've
Mhm.
ended up helping a number of people in that regard. And this almost feels very much the same thing, in that in a lot of other industries, it's like, oh yeah, of course we want to, keep these pieces of the past, or of course we want to document this history somehow. Whereas in tattooing, it feels like as soon as some of the old guys die, all of their stories go with them. And,
Yeah.
and that's the
Mhm.
main thing that I'm trying to prevent. Is I love telling people stories, and I want to make sure that those stories get maintained even after, the people who were there are gone.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because right now, specifically, just because of the unique explosion in tattooing and this just massive, it was like a combination of influx of tattoo artists with access to tools. There's like this big gap in the older generation and the younger generation. And it's great that you're trying to bridge that gap so that way those stories can move forward because that's truly what gives you a lot more appreciation and respect for what you do because we know it is an ancient craft that was done since before written history and we all participate in that. And Antonio in his interview he really laid down the spiritual realm to it, and it's awesome that you're here now specifically trying to help the tattooers tell that story and also have that experience with just helping artists understand how to take this arduous thing we do all the time and then turn it into a means to support ourselves. Now, you mentioned, have you worked in other industry or other art forms and such?
Yeah, so I've primarily, as far as visual arts go, I've worked with tattoo artists, but I'm also pretty well entrenched in the punk rock scene. So I've
Nice.
played in a lot of bands. I work with a lot of bands. I have a company that helps support bands. And so I see a lot of parallels in that sense too. But the
Mhm.
interesting thing to me is that, at least in the punk rock world, I can't say this for every scene, but there's a lot of interest in the bands that came before you. where
Mm-hmm.
everyone has some respect and some reverence for, the old bands, whether they're still around or whether, they passed away, or anything in between. There are a lot of old bands that still get highly regarded, whereas in the tattoo world, you're right that there is that disconnect between the younger generation and the older generation. And I think that disconnect goes a little bit both ways, in that some of the older guys aren't giving the younger people the respect they deserve, but then at
Sure.
the same time, the younger folks aren't necessarily interested in learning about the history and learning about the
Mm-hmm.
tradition that goes with it all the time. So I think it's kind of a balance of those two things, where introducing, great young artists to some of the older generation and saying, hey, look, not everyone's doing these things that you hate. Like, some people are doing things, the way that you would appreciate them. At the same time as going to the younger people and saying, hey, even though, so and so's, work may be outdated or whatever you want to call it at this point, that they helped us get here, and that no one would be here at this point if it wasn't for them, and
Yeah.
to kind of
Yeah.
teach them that side of things.
Oh, I love that because you're right. The shoulders you're standing on, you wouldn't be here, right? And I think there's a lot of stuff that both generations can learn from each other. You're right. A lot of the old schoolers are like, I don't know how to use that newfangled phone tech doohickey,
Right.
right? So, or the younger generation looking back and forgetting that, hey, these predecessors used to build all the equipment that you're using right now. It's only been more recent that everything's corporate and goes through it's made for you where you just open it and start, right? And I think it would be behoove both sides to really learn from each other because we don't know what the future holds, and being able to know how to make and understand where things come from and you be able to be more self-sufficient will be extremely important moving forward. And being able to speak younger generation dialogue from the older gen would just be so more attractive, because there's that level of gatekeeping and old school, rough and tumble. But man, 100% hanging out with Charlie Cartwright and Jack Rudy and Troy Miller, and you get to know that these older tattooers are actually really sweet people. They
Yeah.
they really are good, nice, loving people. They just, they're tattooers. They're just unique.
I mean,
You know?
Rick Walters was always one of my favorite
Yeah.
examples of that, and that
Mm-hmm.
Rick Walters would come off as the meanest, crustiest old man he could, but he was one of the nicest people I ever met.
Mm.
And he was actually one of the ones who convinced my coworker at the Natural History Museum to really get into this so deeply. Is she just fell in
Nice.
love with him and just thought he
Mm.
was like the greatest, the grandpa that she never had. And so yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right, and that a lot of these people, especially the older generation, they want to come off as, rough and rugged and stuff, but you talk to them for a few minutes and they're all just big sweethearts.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool as learning from the history that you kind of had to. Back then it was, competition was competition. The old school tattooers didn't have people like yourself giving them marketing and advertising advice, right? It was like somebody's in your territory, destroy their shop,
Right.
destroy their reputation. So you had to be aggressive, and again, you probably got access to the history talking about when there used to be bouncers in tattoo shops, right? And it was just that type of environment, which completely opposite now, right?
Right.
So now the sweetheart can come out. It's a lot more safe, sanitary, and professional, and it's a really cool. It's a really cool thing that there's people out there like both of you, honestly, that really kind of care about it and are willing to pick up and carry this forward because tattooers just are busy and it's tough to make time for all this. Tattooing is a very time consuming thing. And it just to get all these helpful pieces is just so appreciated, so we know we got stuff coming up. What are some of the current plans, current ideas, current ways that people can get involved? Like how can we kind of move this forward, Josh?
Yeah, so we're always doing events. I know
Mm-hmm.
right now we have the big kind of end of the year art show coming up. But
Mm-hmm.
anytime you see, obviously you can follow Tattoo Heritage Project on Instagram to kind of see the upcoming stuff. But anytime you see an event coming up, those are some of the most direct ways that people can get involved. And we often partner with conventions around the country, and possibly around the world at this point, where if you see someone at a booth, we send the tattoo artist Lucky Bastard, seems like all over the place at a lot of these conventions. And if you see a booth at a convention, or if you see someone's going to be at a convention, like absolutely stop by, talk to them, learn more about it. Because at this point, obviously we do need to fundraise, but we also just want to spread awareness. And I think that's one of the big things to me, is the more people who can understand this mission and understand this project, the funding will come, and whether it's from a government grant, or whether it's from a single private donor, or whether it's from, a million donations from, of $10 from a million different people, however we get there is great. But I think that making sure people are aware of it, and that people know what's happening and can appreciate it, is the most important thing for us right now. Because we are looking at physical spaces, at launching a tattoo museum here in Long Beach, California. And I think that would be awesome, and this is the perfect place to do it. But that requires a lot of resources, and it requires kind of a groundswell of support, like I said, both financially, but also making sure that it's something that people will want to come to. And making sure that people are aware that it's happening, because you can build a museum, but if no one shows up, it's not going to stay open very long.
Has there ever been a similar, I know you mentioned like the punk rock scene, and how a lot of punk rockers want to know their predecessors. Has there been anything similar to this that you've ever worked with?
As far as a museum goes, or as far as kind of the mission?
Yeah, the mission, right? Awareness, and like bringing things forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, a lot of it has been in tattooing, because that's where I've spent a ton of time. But I mean, in the punk rock world, as we both mentioned, like, it's something that I know a lot of the older guys, and I've worked with some of the older guys before, and whether they're still performing or whether they're retired or whatever it may be, helping introduce them to some of the new bands, and also helping each of them spread that awareness, which is something that I'm trying to do here with Tattoo Heritage Project also. That if you have a cool young band, that's going to have a very different audience from a band of a lot of 50, 60-year-old guys who were big in the 90s, or big in the 80s or 2000s or whatever it was, when the younger band may not have even been born, or probably wasn't born. And so I think that kind of introducing each of them to their different audiences is one thing that's kind of crucial from that regard. And again, that's a lot of what I'm trying to do with Tattoo Heritage Project also, is that yes, it's a history museum for the older guys, but I want to introduce the next generation, and I want to introduce the mid schoolers, as some guys refer to themselves too, where it doesn't have to just be, oh, you tattooed at the Pike, or oh, you tattooed pre 1980 or 1990 or whatever. Well, it doesn't have to be that old. I want to get the stories from guys who are working in the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and I want the younger generation to feel comfortable moving forward, that they know there's a place that can kind of safely have their back and tell their stories. So that's kind of one important aspect. And I think the other is kind of what we were talking about earlier, in that, connecting bands with different generations is a lot like kind of teaching older tattooers to use Instagram, or trying to explain TikTok to someone over the age of 60. There's some resistance there, but it's like, no, this is going to be better for everyone. Because if you're an older tattooer and you're not on Instagram, not only are you hurting yourself, but also everyone who's learning about tattoos from Instagram is going to have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
Because you're not on the platform, you're not there. And I think that's one thing that kind of gets lost with a lot of these guys, is it's not just, oh, I don't need to promote myself, I don't need to do these things, I have enough. But it's also, okay, well, no one new is going to find out about you, and that then whether it's new clientele or just new people acknowledging you and knowing of you, I think that's a really important aspect of this, that, like I said, that transcends almost any art form. That if you're not there on the platform, eventually you're going to get forgotten, if there's no one there to support you.
I love that there's someone there to advise that, because it's a source of pride, right? Like, I don't need to promote myself. Everyone knows who I am. Word of mouth is such a intrinsic thing in the tattoo community. So it's almost like, oh, you're advertising. What's wrong with you? But it's just, we have to recognize the writing on the wall, the way things work now. And if they're not there, then they won't learn. And it's great that you're trying to connect. Like, I love it. It's not just the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, like it's something that's for perpetuity moving forward, right? Because there
Right.
will be, I mean, this is being silly, but there may be a point where the modern day tattooers will be outdated, right? Like when you use rotary pens and the iPad, right? And not using lasers and stuff, whatever is going to come up in the future.
Right.
So it's great to know that this is something that generations can move forward through in their career. That's a big thing that tattooers struggle with, and you see it engaging with the older tattooers, is a lot of them didn't set themselves up for
Right.
much. Like, I'm gonna tattoo till I die, and then now they're saturated, and people don't want to get old tattoos. They want the new bells and whistles. So this sounds like it also could be ways for old school tattooers to be curators, or be there to teach or to share or to grow and help the next generation. Is that something in the conversation as well?
Yeah, that's definitely something that we would love to open up. So one thing that, again, combine the two things we've talked about so far today. The Punk Rock Museum in Vegas
Mm,
has a lot of older and some younger punk rockers who come through and give guided tours.
nice.
And they have a little performance space there, and they have stuff like that. And I would love to be able to do something like that with the museum, with the Tattoo Heritage Project, because I'm sure we can only imagine what a guided tour from Jack Rudy would look like. You know, it take
Yeah.
about 5 times longer than a lot of
Yep.
other people's guided tours.
Oh yeah.
But you would get stories that you can't see in the museum,
Mm,
and I'd love to give not just the guests that option, but also, as you said, the artists, something
mm,
where, yeah, hopefully, maybe they can make a little bit of money off it, maybe they can, raise their profile a little bit with it, but to give them a platform and give
mm.
them that ability to at least tell the stories again. Because I mean, Ben, as well as anyone, that tattooing is largely a social job, and that
Mm-hmm.
you spend a lot
Mm-hmm.
of time talking to people,
Yep.
and I
Mm-hmm.
think that some of these older guys, they just want more excuses to tell more stories,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that we can provide, even, again, even without making it a job or something, where, hey,
Mm-hmm.
drop by, give a tour, make a couple bucks, and give a really one of a kind experience to the visitors for that day. So that's something I'd love to see. I'd also love, and this is something that we have not worked out yet, but to have an active licensed tattoo shop within the
Mm-hmm.
museum, where it doesn't necessarily need to have kind of house artists, but we can have guest artists come through.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we did at the Natural History Museum,
Mm.
and people loved it, and it really set us apart from a lot of the other exhibitions that I've worked on, because it wasn't like a one-time thing, or it wasn't like evenings only or something. We literally had someone in there 4 or 5 days a week a lot of the time, and it
Mm.
was everyone from your young up and comers to some really big names, to some old legends that stopped by, and Freddie Negretti tattooed in there. Like, it doesn't get
Nice.
much better than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's something I would love to see, because even if it's, Charlie doesn't do a ton of large scale tattoos, but Charlie could drop by and do some, a handful of his GTCs for the day, and that could be,
Mm-hmm.
a shop that he pops into when he wants, and
Yeah.
so for some of these guys who are kind of looking for, I don't want to say a way out, but just a more relaxed schedule on their tattooing career, I think that could be a
Mm-hmm.
great option, even if it's only, 2 chairs or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, when we interviewed Lucky, he spoke about that traveling tattoo layout, and it almost
Yeah.
had like sections. It felt like a carnival, but then different genres. And I could, we could see it evolve into something like that. You're right. You can almost like get tattooed throughout history. Like, and I mean the sky's the limit. And as you're saying, once it's there, it could turn into anything,
Yeah.
which
And that
which could be
traveling
exciting.
tattoos, or sorry, traveling tattoo museum that Lucky's working on is going to be really cool.
Yeah.
I'm really stoked to see that come to fruition.
Oh, the layout was dope. Yeah, we
Yeah.
got to check it out and talk about it, and we definitely look forward to finding it and get tattooed at it and checking it out. One piece, as we've talked about with both you guys being collectors and huge fans and really helping move this forward is, I mean, I know it's trying to get more awareness about the Tattoo Heritage Project throughout the community, a tattoo community. Is there a focus on shooting for also the clients as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that, I've always seen, and Forrest, I'm sure you've seen this too, in that when you have a bunch of tattooers working on something together, it generally starts to end up very focused from the artist side, which is fine and it's great, but the artists aren't the ones who are going to pay the bills. If we open up a tattoo museum for tattoo artists to come to, it's not going to stay open very long. We need to open up a tattoo museum that not only do artists and collectors want to come to, but casual fans want to come to. Someone who once saw an episode of Ink Master and thinks, oh yeah, I'll go check that out while I'm in Long Beach, whether it's for a convention or vacation or whatever. But we want to open up, or at least in my opinion, we should be looking at collectors, we should be looking at fans. And honestly, these days, one of the paths that I really see forward with this is you have a lot of heavily tattooed celebrities, and a lot of those celebrities are getting tattooed by people either involved with the Tattoo Heritage Project or that could potentially, be reached by them. And I think that would be a great way forward, basically, if we got not necessarily like an influencer campaign, but effectively started using some of the outreach of some of the bigger name clients to say, hey, this isn't just a thing for tattoo artists. This is a cool thing that's happening, that, whether it's an actor or an athlete or a rock star or whatever, that, we want to be a part of it too. And so should you. I think that's some of the messaging that I would love to have us do more of. And obviously, I know that it can be difficult trying to sell your own client on promoting the thing that you're involved with. But I think if we can land a couple of decent kind of promos like that, it could really expand the reach a little bit. Because right now we are relatively prevalent within a lot of the kind of historic tattoo community, where like if you're interested in tattoo history, you've probably at least heard of the Tattoo Heritage Project, I would hope. But also, we obviously need to do more growth in there. And I think expanding outside of that area, and maybe starting with getting to all the other tattooers and then getting to the diehard collectors and then getting to the casual fans. I would love to just kind of see that spider web out.
Yeah, ditto. I mean, definitely touching on that chord that tattooing has affected us since ever, right? And really kind of land on that it affects every single one of us. And it is such an intrinsic thing into our culture, whether we agree with it or not. And definitely, it would be amazing to make it like cool, like where do you kids want to go for summer vacation? I want to go to tattoo land. Like, I want to go to the
Right.
Heritage Project. I want to see old school tattoos. And yeah, just again, it's. I mean, I don't know the percentage, right? Was it 43, 47% of the Americans are tattooed, right? And
Yeah.
it's only just continuing to tick upwards, and more and more youth are finding it fascinating. I think it only makes sense to really kind of bring the message out to the masses because. I mean, you're right. That's what's going to keep the doors open. That's going to keep people coming to it.
Yeah. And I think also tattooing is in a really unique place and has been a unique place in that it can be considered both folk art and high end fine art at this point. In that obviously the roots of tattooing are in kind of the more, traditional folk art realm. But at this point, you also have tattooers doing incredible work and having, paintings and displays in high end museums, and even, doing tattoos on skin that look like,
Yeah.
high end paintings that you would see in museums, and just unbelievable, incredible work. And I think that there's an appeal to the, I guess, art world and art and culture world that for a long time eluded the tattoo world, because it was often viewed as kind of a substandard art form, or, kind of a low class art form, that now it's been broaching that area for a while now at this point. It's not new to have a tattooer who's also a high-end painter, but then at the same time, how many times are you going to see, a tattoo art exhibit at LACMA, or at MoCA or MoMA or anywhere like that, where it's like, if you have these fancy kind of modern art or contemporary art museums, let's make a tattoo museum that can also appeal to that crowd, where it's history, but it's also, look at this incredible art, where even if you're not interested in what was happening in, the 1970s, or you're not interested in that kind of the formerly, dirty underside of tattooing, you still can look at it and appreciate the artwork, and you can go there and discover a new artist, or, find someone whose artwork that you love. Because I think there's a lot of that, and I think we're seeing more and more of that at some of the shops, and that branch of high-end artwork is really available for us to leap into as a museum, in addition to the history realm.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love you're thinking that way. Again, when we speak to tattooers, it's like they want to talk to tattooers. Hey, you should appreciate history and you should support this. But then you have, yourself, who's a collector and an advocate for us, is like, yes, and everyone else, right? And there's so many different ways we can spiral out, and so many different ways we can touch different lives, and just make it something that we couldn't even imagine it would be. Yeah, it just comes from the love of it. Even though you're not doing it, you're still just as much of a fan. And talk about fine art. Forrest has an amazing, almost bodysuit. He's got some awesome work, and he's always got great questions. And sometimes he may come up with. I don't know, Forrest, you got any questions for Josh from the perspective of a collector?
Yeah, I definitely have some questions. I first just wanted to commend you for the effort you put into documenting something that for so long has been more of a spoken history, traditionally. So I think it's really, especially with the time that we're at, where there are still the first generation kind of living legends are still alive and around. So it's awesome that you're around at such a pivotal time. Yeah, and I feel a lot of the common ground that spans all these different generations, and that I've even learned through some of these tattoo heritage projects, is that it's a lot of the same people, the reason they fell in love with it, and how to kind of fall more in love with tattooing over time kind of remains the same. And that's, so I'm kind of curious about what initially had you fall in love and go from that casual collector and appreciator of art to now dedicating a big part of your career. Was it the music scene that brought you into it? Was it just kind of getting tattooed and meeting artists and hearing these stories? What led you to really fall in love with it as a craft and make it such a major focus for your life?
I think it was a little bit of everything. And I know that's a total cop-out answer. But from the music perspective, I would be lying if I said that didn't have an impact on me. My first my first tattoo was a band tattoo, and it was encouraged by the band themselves.
Nice.
And we don't need to go into that story on camera, but
why not?
Yeah, and so it was just one of those things where that was the first time that I ever got tattooed, I think 2 months after my 18th birthday. But from that moment forward, and even as a kid, my dad's best friend was covered in tattoos, and as a kid in the 90s, you just didn't see a whole lot of full sleeves. And I got to see them and loved them as a kid, but I think that transition of meeting artists and kind of befriending them a little bit really was and like I said, at the same time going to journalism school and realizing that I kind of wanted to tell these stories, and not just in the tattoo world, but that I wanted to tell interesting stories for interesting people, that weren't necessarily getting told. And I started realizing that, everyone wants to interview bands. Everyone wants to, interview comedians and that kind of stuff. And I do all that stuff as well. But the one group of people that I was spending a lot of time with who never got interviewed were tattooers. And so I didn't set out to I'm going to become the guy for this, or I'm going to become a tattoo historian. That was never my idea. It was literally, it started with the second person who ever tattooed me. I had, I just picked up a freelance gig writing for the local newspaper out in Arizona, and I was like, hey, like maybe they'll take a tattoo piece. And I talked to the editor, and the editor said sure. And I went and I talked to my friend who, like I said, at this point has tattooed me a handful of times, but at that point I'd only ever been tattooed by 2 people, and he was one of them. And I literally, at that time, I would just go and I'd ask the person that I interviewed for recommendations for the next artist that I should interview. And I think that really kind of helped me get a better understanding and become more entrenched in, again, at first the Arizona scene, and then now the California scene. And the more I met people and the more I got to know people, the more I realized that it was just a totally underrepresented community. And I know that like kind of sounds cheesy, but it's true that in any other art form, if you had this many people who have been doing it for this long and making a living, and aside from all that, impacting the culture, because again, this was all happening in like the early 2010s. Yeah, I guess it would have been 2011 was probably 2012 was probably the first time that I wrote a tattoo piece. And for all of that to be happening at that point, when tattooing was already as huge as it was, I mean, what we're at that point, it's all over TV and a million different shows, and everyone's tattooed. And yet you'd see all these stories about like conventions with people winning awards, and you'd see like bands getting interviewed about their tattoos, but you'd never see the artists getting interviewed. And that was really the thing for me was, okay, everyone that I know in the tattoo world has a story. Why is no one telling them? And I think that kind of made me appreciate it. And then, like you said, just befriending people and realizing how much had gone into it and how much history there was and how much of it was untold, because that's one of my main goals is, I've told Charlie multiple times, I want to sit down with him for like 2 days and just hear every story he can think of, and just record them, because one day Charlie's not going to be around to tell those stories anymore, and I want to make sure that all these guys get their stories down and get their stories out, before they're lost to time.
Totally. And it is what your story kind of reminds me of, something that Corey Miller, who decades before you got into tattooing for the same reason, of like his band, their logo, like that same kind of pressure to get a tattoo. So that's like something that I've found interesting to these interviews, that from modern day to now, like there is kind of a common path among people. And I think it's really important what you're doing now specifically, where it's like, where there is this boom in the 2010s around tattooing, TV just kind of starting to get its little spotlight that people have always kind of been curious about. But I feel like a lot of the general public, either they're afraid to ask the questions or don't know how to. So it's cool that you're kind of taking that role and like being the one to ask these questions that either people don't know what to ask, or they're just kind of too intimidated to do it. So it's just awesome to see that you're a part of that kind of boom to bring it more into like the front of people's minds and really understand it more. Because you're right, it is kind of like a still under highlighted thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things that I guess inspired me in some ways, and to be clear, I've actually never watched any of the tattoo reality shows. I have a lot of friends who have been on them, but I've never actually watched one. But when I tell people about, the most important things in tattoo history, the beginning of Miami Ink has to be one of them, because that was the first time that a lot of random people in the middle of the country who never would have set foot in a tattoo shop saw the inside of a tattoo shop and saw a tattoo actually being done. And so for as much as people love to like hate on the TV shows and stuff like that, they did make tattooing a lot more accessible for a lot of people. And I think for me, I almost look at it the same way, in that if no one's telling these stories, aside from the fact that the stories won't get out, the art form and the history and the tradition around it is all going to be this, mystery that people don't know about, or that they're scared to get into. And it's like there's very little mystery in tattooing. It's mostly just that people never asked the right questions and people never got the right stories. And I think that kind of demystifying, so to speak, that seeing it on TV has done for a lot of people. I want to do, and I have done to some degree through these projects, you know, whether it's writing about them and telling people stories, or whether it's the Tattoo Heritage Project. Because it's not like there aren't tattoo history museums out there, but they're generally very small. They're usually very dedicated to like one aspect or another. Sometimes it's even just like local for the city that they're in. And that's all fine. Like that's all a great start. But if you're not telling the full picture on some level, you're leaving out so much of it that people aren't going to understand the context. It's the same as like seeing an individual tattoo that's going to be a part of a full sleeve or a full body suit versus seeing the whole thing finished. You know, it just doesn't work as well if it's planned to be a bigger picture.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, just you only got one piece of the puzzle. You need all of them to make the picture truly come together. And you're right, tattoo artists specifically are underrepresented in so many different realms. We won't even get into regulations and stuff because that's somewhere we're struggling at as well. But I love, you're right, when 04 happened, Miami Heat came out, we even at one point at the shop, we had t-shirts that said, "No, I don't watch Miami Ink," because everybody that came in, it's like, "You seen that show?" And it's just like, no, but you know, no matter what, personally, I appreciate what it's done. I mean, I watch them, but it's opened up the panorama of tattoo to so many people, and it's really helped ingrain it into our culture. And I love that this is what we're trying to do too for history. So that way, people from all demographics, no matter where you come from, it don't matter. You can find out that body art of some form has been in your history. Your ancestors have done it, you know, so it's really cool. And then you can lift that up, you know, in those tattoos, even the old school punk rock tattoo you got, you know, whether it's awesome and you're proud of it, you still look at it like, that's a story. It's a piece of me, you know, and that's was really cool. Call back to your ancestors too.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think that, you know, similar to the reality TV shows, Instagram's another thing. I know we talked about Instagram briefly earlier, but to me, that's arguably the second biggest, you know, moment for tattooing as far as popularity goes, because all of a sudden, instead of having a portfolio in your shop where someone can come flip through photos, now someone can see you from across the world and see the work you did yesterday. Like that's that, you know, again, we're talking back in the day when people used to mail pictures back and forth to each other. You know, it's literally the same thing. It's just been sped up and brought to the masses in ways that, you know, honestly, I don't know that tattooing ever would have done it itself. You know, where I think Instagram kind of forced tattooing to do it, and the art form and the culture is better for it. But again, that's the same conversation to have with some of the older guys who are really opposed to it. And it's like, okay, well, if you're not going to have an Instagram now, you wouldn't have had a portfolio book for people to look through, or you wouldn't have had flash on the walls, because it's literally just the updated version of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Google reviews are the new virtual word of mouth. Like that's how so many clients come to our studio. They're like, "Oh, I found you had good reviews." You know, it's like just getting that thumbs up from a person when they see your tattoo. So no, it is it's just the way the world is. But without it, we would totally have at least not be where we're at today. You know, it would be something that was extremely niche and not well known. But it's great that they have you on their team to bring all these elements to it. And I know there's a great team on the Tattoo Heritage Project, and we're really enjoying getting to meet and engage with all these different pieces. And I know you mentioned there's obviously an upcoming dinner at the end of the year, just being involved. You know, what about you personally? Is there anything that you got upcoming that you want to share that anybody could check out?
No, but I was just going to say that my old band ended at the beginning of this year. And so my new band started, and we're playing shows and putting out music. So that band is called Decent Times. And on Instagram, there's only one T in Decent Times, but written out as two different words. But yeah, and anyone can go check that out. That's the main thing I'm promoting these days. But I mean, you know, for myself, I'm also happy to talk to other tattooers and other tattoo shops outside of Tattoo Heritage Project, where if there's something that you need help with, or, you know, you need assistance on in kind of any way. I've helped people with everything from opening their own shop to again to marketing, to getting through regulations and everything else like that. So I'm
Nice.
happy to assist. Like I like helping people. I like helping people in the arts. I like, all that kind of stuff. So I'm really I'm available if anyone needs me. And I think I probably have a better understanding of the industry than a lot of other people, with like a marketing or a corporate background. And I probably have a much better understanding of the marketing and corporate world than most people in the tattoo industry. So,
Yeah.
Forrest, I'm sure you kind of feel the same way, but
hmm
there's just not a whole lot of that overlap out there. And I think that
hmm
I can certainly help a lot of people in a lot of different ways with that.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely is a great resource. Tattooers should want to know you. And so if they wanted to talk to you, be at decent times on Instagram, just talk to you.
No, my personal is JC_Chesler.
Cool.
So just my first initial, middle initial, underscore last name. And they can reach
hmm
out to me there, or my Gmail is just JC Chesler, all one word. Either of those is totally fine. I'm usually pretty good at responding. But yeah, you can probably ask your other tattooer friends and they may already know me. Because that's
Nice.
often I'll hear from people and it's always, oh, so and so told me to reach out to you. So
Mhm.
apparently word of mouth still does okay for me.
Yeah, nice, nice, very cool. Well, a collective thank you, from at least what tattoo group I would represent, in the sense that like we do appreciate people like yourself coming in and helping us, be more represented, helping us be exposed to the masses, and helping us perpetuate our legacies forward. So, again, we thank you for your time. We appreciate what you do. And yeah, we look forward to connecting in person and seeing how the Heritage Projects moves forward and in your adventures as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ben, for having me, and thank you, Forrest, for making it all happen.